Hey, welcome to the Contractor Commute. Today we're going to talk about the importance of knowing your costs. And so we got into this one. Really, I was talking to my dad, and they just moved and had to have their entire house painted. The interior house was beautiful, but the lady who had it before them painted it like it was like dark red and dark green. It was like a very Christmassy theme on the walls.
80s colors.
No offense if that's what you're into, but my parents are not. So they had to get the house painted. So I was talking to my dad, and he told me the price on it, and I was like, hey, you mind sending me that, the estimate, the invoice, kind of both of them that he got. So I looked at him and I called the guy up because I'm like, man, we could help this guy with what we do here at ConGenius. And so gave the guy a call, and nice guy, contractor, does remodels, took the painting job because he had some downtime. And so I asked him kind of how he broke it down. And so he's like, well, yeah, I gave him the high number. He's like, but your parents seem like pretty cool people. Like they'd be easy to work for, good job, whatever. Yep. I figured I'd get it knocked out in 3 days. So my dad was a sales guy. He sold RVs and motorhomes forever. So, he's basically a used car salesman. So he's still, no matter where he goes, he's always trying to get a deal.
An ethical used car salesman.
An ethical used car salesman. He's a good man. But he just thinks everything's up for negotiation. He's that guy, So sure enough, he goes back to the guy and, tries to knock a couple grand off the price. And the contractor met him in the middle. He's like, and so I called the guy up. I was like, hey, my dad tried to lowball you. I mean, I knew he did, but he's like, I met him in the middle. Like, well, why'd you do that? He's like, well, they just seemed like nice people and the whole deal. And so anyways, interesting conversation. But I asked him, hey, did you still make any money on that? And his answer was, well, I mean, I probably did, but it kind of just exposed what we talk about often is like not knowing your numbers, not knowing what your actual costs are. But his method is he goes in there, he's like, I look around, I've done it enough times where I can kind of eyeball it. And, I got a number that I think it's fair. I think it makes sense, But there was no real calculations, didn't take any measurements, didn't look up costs of paint or materials of those things. Just, got him a quote back out, basically immediately. But the big question that we ask here is, did you make money on it or not? The answer was, I'm not really sure, which we run into this situation a lot. This guy is the guy. If you're listening to this, you might be that guy as well, which is at ConGenius. What we're trying to do is provide resources, opportunities, kind of education, insight on ways you can make more money in your business.
Well, I can identify with that as well. I remember having a project where a client, of all the people that negotiate, this one was particularly hard-nosed on his negotiation. It was like, hey, can you got a job, knocked $5,000 off of that. And the funny thing is, I was fairly new to starting my business. And my first thought was not, well, what does it cost me? My first was like, let's try to accommodate that. And you heard this contractor talking about these nice folk. They're not going to be a pain in the rear end. Yep. They're going to be nice to work for because they want to believe the story that everything's going to work out fine.
Right.
But not really necessarily knowing hard numbers. And so I think the theme today, talking about the importance of knowing the costs, suddenly, if we know what things cost us, the degree of confidence we have going into something is so much higher. And then when the negotiation, the inevitable happens and somebody says, can you come down $5,000 or whatever the number is? We can say, no, that's a fair number. And I'm making 12% or 10% or whatever the profit number is. And you can be almost very transparent and honest with your client. And nobody's going to say, oh, well, take some of that profit off of there. 10%? Are you kidding?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we go back to that story. So my dad has no idea what this guy's margins are. He has no clue what it costs to paint the entire house or how many hours it's going to take. And so, for, my dad or customer X, whoever it is, like, they're trying to get the psychological thing of just feeling like they got a deal.
Good point.
And you are the one who's responsible to know how much room do I actually have in this bid? And if I say yes to a different price, am I making money or not? Your customer doesn't know that.
And from your dad, from a sales perspective, he would know where the numbers need to be at. If somebody came to him and said, hey, can you come down $5,000 on a car or an RV? He would know whether he could or not.
Correct.
He would know what the margins are. He said, well, I'm 15%. I can come down to 10. That's all I can do.
Yeah. On the used car, he knows what they have in it.
Yep.
He knows what he can get out of it. And so that's the same thing. It's like that's one item, a car, right? It's more complex in the contracting world. It's not just one thing. It's hours, it's hard costs, all those things. We'll get into it. Yeah. But when you know your costs, you have a better idea of what pricing makes sense for you and how much money you're actually making. And if that guy went back and told my dad, hey, I only got 10, 15% in this, my dad would have been like, really? And probably would have paid full price.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, the temptation comes back to the ballpark numbers. We're so busy, we're doing things, and I think there's also a temptation that we're good enough. Like, clearly this guy's not an amateur. He's been doing it a long time, does great work, he knows what he's doing. So the temptation, and I've been in that spot myself where I could look at a project and know in my head how long that wall was, how high it was. You knew the square footage, you knew what things cost you in the past. You have a general idea of material cost, and it breeds a sense of overconfidence where you come into things and say, I know that's about that. I have a friend who told me he almost went out of business after being in business for several decades because he made some assumptions. And he thought, I've been doing this long enough. He knew. I mean, he did. I mean, he was very good. It is very good. And he got to that point where he'd ballpark things and the material costs skyrocketed on him. Cost of metal went up. And suddenly he was losing money hand over fist. And by the time he knew that was happening, it was almost too late. So the danger of not being curious and not being diligent to stay on top of this and just making some assumptions is very serious.
Well, I think it's it is serious, and I think why people don't go back and look at this is it just seems overwhelming.
So true.
No, how do I even figure that out?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of, maybe there's two ends of this. One would be where things are simple enough. If you're a flooring installer or a carpet installer, you say, well, it's $2 a square foot. That's what it costs us. There's not necessarily a material component to this. Mm-hmm. But as a business scales, so do the costs related to doing something.
Right.
And so one man in a truck, you can have a pretty good idea what things cost you. But is that the dream? Do you want to stay where you're at in that 1-2 guy shop, or are you trying to scale from there? So I think some of the objectives for your business kind of weigh into this as well, right? I mean, if you keep the sort of the very simple type of operation, maybe you can manage with the ballpark. But as soon as you actually have enough, as soon as you hire your first employee or you add another truck to your fleet, the costs get more complex.
Right. Or in the personal side of your life. You get married, you have a kid, you want to, buy a house, so you have objectives personally, and your business is trying to fund those objectives. Well, what is your goal for profit for the year? And what are you trying to get to move, not just your business forward, but your life, because if you have that per square foot number in your mind, and it's the same number you've been using for 7 years, I can tell you we're going to be 7 years from now, exactly where you are. And if that's where you want to be, great. But if you're like, hey, I want to move forward, I want to put more money in savings, I want to work towards retirement, I got to save for my kids' college or whatever you're trying to do. Those personal goals should also cause you to go back and revisit your numbers, saying, hey, why do I charge what I charge? And does that still make sense for me?
What happens in an economic recession? Think back 2007, 2008, where a lot of people were hurting.
A lot.
And if you knew your costs, what you could say, I'll come down to just to stay busy, just to put food on the table. You can cut your margins back, take the profit down to 1-2% just to make sure you're clearing. Get your guys paid, pay yourself, pay your material costs. You're surviving. You're not making 15-20% profit. But if you don't know what the costs are, how much can you scale back? You could be digging into things. You might as well stay home and not do anything if you're losing money.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we've talked about it before, but you just compete on price only in a recessionary environment, it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Whoever wins that race loses their business. So let's talk about kind of what, why it's important. Let's talk about the actual components of cost. So if we know, I got to revisit this, I got to kind of, as you like to say, interrogate the story. The story in my mind is, well, it's all going to work out. Okay, well, you need to interrogate that story and revisit it and say, maybe it's not going to work out. We get to that point, let's talk about what are the actual components of cost. So when we say know your costs, what are things people need to be looking at other than the obvious?
Yeah, so let's talk about the obvious first, because labor, material is a very simple equation in a lot of scenarios. We can just look at it and say, well, we have $100 of material and $100 of labor. We have $200 in the project. So simple.
Right.
Like so many things and wrong. So when we talk about the hard costs, right? Those are the things. Or the labor could be a subcontractor doing it for us. They say, that's going to cost $5,000 to do X, Y, and Z. And the material costs are another $2,500, $7,500 job. So then we talk about, well, if there's labor, if you employ anybody, if you have any employees, including yourself, you have a labor burden. Essentially, it's the cost of facilitating the laborers and benefits. If you give a guy one day off, he's not doing anything on that day. You paid him to do something. So across the rest of the year, he's contributing towards that benefit, right? Or you're having to charge to contribute to that benefit. So the benefits, the time off, the bonuses, any type of insurance, taxes, those are all part of labor. Those are what we call labor burden. And so that can get out of hand real quick because we look at the $25 an hour we're paying the guy and we don't think about the 30 to 40% sometimes we're adding on to that for the labor burden. Right. So we need to know what that number is. So what I like to do is, it's as simple as a pad of paper where we say, okay, these are the people I have working for me. This is how much I pay them. This is how much the taxes cost. This is how much the insurance costs, and kind of coming up with a percentage of saying, well, at $40 an hour and I have a 30% labor burden, I'm going to multiply times 1.3 to get my number of what my costs are for that guy.
Yeah.
Then we've got the overhead aspect of it. And this one's tricky because it shifts over time. And the smartest people I know that have been successful in this space use depreciation as a way of knowing what things cost them. So you buy a truck, we don't assume that that's done. We assume that that truck is going to be depreciated to nothing over a period of time. What we mean by that is we say a $50,000 pickup truck in 10 years is worthless.
Yep.
From a depreciation standpoint. So we're saying over $5,000 a year of that truck is being depreciated.
Right.
And the nice thing about that approach, you could get it to work for 15 years. The point is not how long you can get something out of the truck. It's to account for the fact that you have tools, you have equipment that cost you something. And so that's a part of your overhead.
Yep.
So we have depreciation because you have to replace that truck at some point or buy another one, or that's part of it. Then you have your office expenses. And sometimes I remember when I first started, I didn't have an office. So didn't have that expense. But eventually we did. And that's, man, I got caught sitting flat. What is that? Flat-footed?
Yeah. Yeah, sitting flat.
Yeah.
Flat. They were feet and they were flat.
Yeah, exactly. But, very flat-footed when they first, office got set up, and I was like, oh, this is great. Customers can come in and they can see the office. It's more legitimacy. Mm-hmm. We've got a shop, place to put our tools. It was just beautiful. But that thing cost something.
Oh, yeah.
And where was that? That's all part of the overhead. Nobody's paying you there's no line item on your proposal that says shop.
Right.
So it's added onto your costs. So simple, we've got labor burden, we've got overhead costs, and then obviously whatever type of acquisition costs and material as well. Like I think there's an easy mistake to make in materials is just making the assumption that a 2x4 is $350, so therefore it cost me $350. Well, how did you get that 2x4 to the job?
Right.
Transportation costs, time, figuring out what to get. Mm-hmm. So the back office process is involved with that. So you get a pretty good idea. And I know there's other things we can really, I don't want to get too crazy with, breaking this all down, but I think we get the idea, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, even if someone was listening to that, they're like, man, that's a lot to figure out. It is. But if you have it right or close to right, and and you have it pretty dialed in, that tells you if you're making money or not.
Right.
The guy that I was referencing earlier didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. And so he didn't know what he had room for to negotiate on. Or maybe, if you know this, you know that you can't or shouldn't negotiate. So getting those things right puts you in the right space as far as how are you pricing things.
Yeah.
How do you know you're actually making money? How do you know you can actually replace those tools when they wear out without taking a small business loan that you didn't plan on taking a year ago? Those are things that if you've thought ahead, you can sleep a lot better at night.
Yeah.
I think let's get into the house. We talked about why and how would you recommend someone figure out what their costs are and then track those things? Mm-hmm. Because that seems like a lot especially for someone who maybe isn't used to software, isn't used to writing it all down. They just want to go work and build and contract. How do you think they should do this?
My mind goes towards even the commitment part of it because, the first stage of this is the mental part of just saying, I do want to know, because I think that's the hurdle that needs to be overcome first off.
Yeah.
Until I was curious enough to say, I actually want to know my costs, I could wing it and hope it all worked out in the end.
Sometimes you don't want to know. It's like you go to the you ever go to the doctor's office? Like, I don't step on the scale at home, but I went to the doctor last week for a normal checkup thing, and I saw the scale. I'm like, oh man, I don't think I want to know. I don't want to know how much I weigh. I don't need to know this. It's like certain things, it's ignorance is bliss, right? Where you're like, hey, if I know, then I need to do something about it.
Yeah.
And there's so many little things in my life where I'm like, I don't want to know. Just because I don't want to know. Even like your own personal finances. How much money do you spend eating out every month?
I don't know.
Yeah, and I probably don't want to know because I'd be compelled to do something about it if I knew. So I think that's a great point. Is like, one, you have to want to know, because if you don't want to know and you want to bury your head in the sand and just keep doing what you're doing, sure. But I think when you realize, hey, wait, this could actually bankrupt me, or this could stop me from getting to where I want to go personally in my life.
100%.
If there's an appetite to learn and know, that is step one.
Yeah, and I think that's why we titled this podcast as the importance of knowing your costs, because I think a lot of times it's this reflection, that moment, and sometimes it's because there's pain involved. Sometimes it's because things really hurt. Mm-hmm. It's so much better to be on the front end of this and say, yeah, there's importance to this, and I'm gonna get all over this, and I need to know exactly where I'm at. You're gonna feel so much freer when you go in to negotiate with a client and you just know where your costs are at. Just like, you feel free as a bird. Somebody comes down and says, hey, can you knock anything off of that? You know what you can and can't do.
Yeah.
Even other people, competitors, well, I mean, if they're less money, you're losing money, or they're doing something else. And you can speak to that as well, of just saying, well, you go to the client and they say, well, that's high. It's like, well, I got a bid for half that. It's like, well, making sure it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Is it apples to oranges, or are we both talking the same thing?
Right. Yeah.
So it gives you that angle too. And then there's the whole aspect of making sure your business is solvent, like you brought up, Drew, of just being able to get to the next level. You don't get to the next level unless you know where you're at. So, okay. Everyone's clear on that.
Yeah.
The how.
Yeah. Yeah. So
never mind. Yeah.
No, it's good though. I mean, like, how do you, like, I think the how is the next step on there, and, wanting to know why, and then, interrogating the number, especially if you're in a line of work where, hey, I bill by the square foot, like, or things like that. Do you really know why you bill that number? And is the number you were using a year ago still the right number to be using today?
Sometimes we borrow other people's numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob down the street does it $1.41 a square foot, so I'll do it for $1.38.
Bob weighs 165 pounds, so do I.
So yeah, we just don't have enough insight into what the number's based on. In fact, I tell you a story. I had an estimator who used instead of kind of a shortcut. I hate to rag people, but he would go to Google and just say, what does it cost to do this? And he would look at what the high end was from Google, or the low end, and put something in the middle. But that's a temptation, right? What does House say that should cost, or whatever, Home Advisor, or one of these other places, and they dictate what you should be what you are charging people.
Yeah.
But what are the other intangible things? The quality level, the how long does it take you to do it? If you're employing highly skilled people, there's a different cost involved than the cheap, just get it done cheap. So so let's talk a little bit more about the how part of it. Let's just break it down into a couple key things. One is understanding materials. I feel like most people can get a good grip on that if you just spend a little bit of time with it, breaking the project down, relying on some of your vendors to help you with that as well, because sometimes we can forget things. Having a good template is really helpful as well, where you can go in and say, okay, I'm doing bathroom remodels a lot, so let's get this right, and kind of dig deep in that first time. Put some placeholders in there. Okay, well, we do this as a part of it. We've got this category for tile, and we've got the category for the trim and the cabinet, et cetera. So we don't forget something stupid. Or somebody comes back later and says, oh, you mean you're not installing the tile?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you should have had that in there. It says tile. So things like that could be helpful. Materials, breaking that all down, getting a good material list, making sure we have some margin in there for that as well, marking up our materials, make sure we cover our ancillary costs. And then on the labor side, this is kind of a one-time thing as well, at least for each labor rate, figuring out what my labor burden is. And as things change, making sure you're going back, keeping track of, maybe every 6 months you just go through and say, who am I employing? How much do I pay them? What are the benefits? And, even an accountant could be helpful in that, right? Help you break it down. What is my labor burden? Yeah. They should know. If you have an accountant or a CPA that files your taxes, you could look back and say, okay, I had this many dollars of labor, and this is how much I spent in all the benefits for it, and this is what it cost me.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Talk about using software, because if you're the guy right now who's just like writing it down, or a lot of people use Excel or something, what software, I don't know, like this is like the softball lob for ConGenius, but also like just the value of using software, period, whether it's ConGenius or not. We realize we're not the only ones out there, but what is the value of using software on this?
I think particularly with what we're building, we're trying to make sure that we're not replicating things over and over again. I talk to so many people that it seems like every time they create an estimate, they're starting from scratch. That's a dangerous spot to be in. We want to be able to learn from our mistakes and learn from inaccuracies, or learn from things that, or it's constant improvement. And I think what we do in software is we're able to capture the data we have from the last project, learn from that data, improve upon how we break it down, because it's a little bit of work involved. If we wanted to make an assembly or what we call task in ConGenius and say, okay, well, we're going to build a wall and we have 2x4s and plywood and all the rest of it, well, that's a lot of work to figure out exactly how much per linear foot that's going to cost or per square foot. But when over time we get better and better at it because we're breaking it down to that. So I think that's the benefit of software, was if you had to do that manually, try grabbing data on paper from a month ago and try to analyze all that data and trying to come up with what, did I make money or not? I mean, that's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, it's overwhelming. You say, why bother?
You don't have a system of record for what you did in the past, to learn from it and adjust and go forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of it is just ease of being able to put something that's very accurate out very quickly. So let's just say, for instance, you build that wall out, you figure out what the plywood costs, and you say, okay, there's 32 square feet for a 4x8 sheet of plywood. You can figure out how that pans off to a linear foot. And once you do all the math, the next time you need to do that, you're just saying, okay, I'm going to do that again. Right. And you have a confidence that you spent the time, and you can look back at historical data, and you're building something that's better every day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's evolving as you do. And it
speeds the process up tremendously.
Totally.
And then you can interface with some of the tools like digital takeoffs, where you can pop a plan in there. Now we have something built out. We can just say, oh, well, how many linear feet of wall do we have? And we're done. Yeah. So what used to take an hour to figure out because you're starting from scratch every time is now a 30-second process.
Yeah. And how much is that worth? Your time, your money, your mental energy too. Yeah. And I think it's, sleep at night knowing your estimates are on point, you're profitable. And even if you lose one over price, you're glad you lost it. Yeah. It's like, yep, didn't want that one. If that's, because you knew you lost money if you did it.
We talk about making sure that as a part of a sales pipeline that's healthy, you should be losing jobs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think I was talking to a guy last week, and he was like, I'm not really interested in ConGenius or anything else because I win every job I bid, but like that was his measure of success. It's a pride point almost. It's a pride point. Mm-hmm. I got more work than I can keep up with. And so while that's a good thing from a survival standpoint, it's not a good thing from an actually thriving, and being successful, because busyness is, like don't confuse activity with achievement. You know what I mean? Like to be successful, you actually have to be profitable. But that was, the question I asked. Well, did you make money on those? How much money are you making on all those? Well, I don't know. So you can be busy and losing money. And to your point, your friend that you're talking about, they didn't know until 6 months, a year in. They're like, wait a minute, there's no money in the bank. Why? Yeah. I've been busy working my tail off, working long days, long weeks. Yeah. But the bank account is still empty. That's where ConGenius or software can help you out.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's very, very difficult to track when we're busy doing. And without software to kind of raise a red flag where you're actually interrogating those costs. Yeah. You can really be in a spot of bother.
I do this too, man. I will intentionally get myself busy with other things when there's something I don't want to think about.
Ooh, yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like, well, I don't want to think about that, so let me go get busy with something else so I can sort of brush that one under the rug for another month, another 3 months, And so I would say if you're in that spot where you're like, I don't really know my costs, I'm kind of just winging it. And at the end of every month, I'm just hoping there's money in the bank account. And if I had a flat tire or my truck broke down, I don't know what I would do. Those are good indicators that you do need to get software. Check out ConGenius, free plug, right? But check us out. We're not software just for software. Our goal is to help you figure out how to make sure you're profitable, you're making money, you're saving time, all of those things. And don't fool yourself and then just go get busy working and drown out the noise of that red light that's flashing.
I've done
in
that.
Your mind.
Yeah, and it bears painful consequences. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the other things that I think is an element of ConGenius is the service aspect of it as well, where if somebody's in a spot where they need help in even setting up this whole process, the support here is phenomenal. Yeah. I mean, you guys do an amazing job.
Yeah. By support, he means me.
Yeah. Drew, you're doing well.
No, we got our team though. Like, it's our goal. Like, we're not just trying to sell people software. Like, we actually want to help you win, right? And so,
100%.
If especially most of our customers are guys. Most guys don't like asking for help. And most guys want to figure it out on their own.
Boy, do we ever.
And ConGenius, you can get through most of it on your own pretty easily. It's pretty intuitive. But any frustrations people run into, like, we're actually looking forward to helping people, because it's not just a job. Yeah. It's a kind of a mission. So All right. So at the end of the day, like we're trying to help you reach your goals and get there, figure out what your costs are. You got to know that. However you go about doing this with us or not, that's fine. But you got to know what they are. Don't bury yourself in it. Understand the importance of knowing your costs. Understand what they are, how to get those calculations right. If you need help with that, again, we're here for you. And then find a how. Whether it's us or anyone else, find your how of how you make sure you're continually going back, evaluating your costs so that you know you're profitable.
Let me wrap up with this a quick story in my business. So I went from being the guy in the dark to not knowing where I was at. And I spent the time to try to figure this out. Now, I didn't have a tool like this, and this was extremely painful, and really was some of the motivation behind building ConGenius was from this experience. But I went in and started building out all of the spreadsheets that I needed to know where I was at. And at the end of the day, I knew, okay, this is what the job costs were. This is what I made on it or lost on it.
Yeah.
And the level of confidence I had going into jobs from there, I remember this one customer, he said, hey, can we do this? It was a change order. We're doing a several $100,000 remodel, and he had a change order as in part of that process. And I remember him saying, it was granite countertops that got out of hand, and we're keeps adding things onto it, changing materials. And because we knew where we're at, we caught that. I felt like so many times when you're in these big projects, we would get lost in the weeds and stuff would just get added on. And that's the other part of it that we really didn't even talk about. But as scope changes, if you know where you're at, last week you didn't make money or didn't make money, you're so much more protective of it. You realize you cannot work for free. I started getting that in my core being where I'm not working for free.
Yeah.
It's when I knew what my costs were, I could protect that. Before it was one of those things where, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And that head in the sand thing you brought up was so where I was at.
Yeah.
It made a radical difference in my business. We were able to sell more effectively, able to hold our heads up high. I remember it's just a transformation. And so I think this is huge. I think it's a mentality thing, the curiosity, the interrogating, the stories, making sure that, but it really is something that's awesome.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, love to hear some stories from people that have had similar experiences too. People that have mastered this process, what works, what doesn't work. And it's so unique to each business.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely is. So, well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Contractor Commute. So again, you can find us, on social media, all the normal channels, YouTube, et cetera. So if you got comments, feedback, leave it there. We're all ears. You can also email us directly if you want to, either Ben or Drew at congenius.com.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.